Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Great to have you with us. So this afternoon, we have the pleasure of our speaker, Mr. Steve Rubinow, who is going to be speaking on the key strategies for IT innovation in financial securities. Steve, may I extend a note that we are delighted that you got here. Thank you for your intrepid journey to make it from a delayed and then cancelled flight to Dubai. I won't lie, we all had a small heart attack, so delighted to see you here today. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Rubinow is Executive Vice President and Chief Information Officer, the New York Stock Exchange, Euronext. And he is responsible for the most technological endeavors at the company. Prior to joining the New York Stock Exchange, Euronext, he was the Chief Technology Officer of Archipelago Holdings, Inc., and prior to its merger with the New York Stock Exchange in 2006. Ladies and gentlemen, please warmly welcome Mr. Steve Rubinow.
Great. I'm so glad to be here with you today. As you just heard, I had a little bit of a problem getting here. I'd hoped to be here yesterday, and I think the planes failed me, so I had to resort to traveling by camel. I came across the desert. I think I passed the dinner last night, and I saw you had a good time, but I was determined to get to the hotel because I was tired, so I managed to make it, regardless of the transportation. In any case, you'll see that I don't have any slides up here. And I just thought I would touch on a few topics, some of which we will talk about in our cloud panel, which follows, others of which, of course, you could always ask me offline in any way that you want. And the time that we have to talk about here reminds me of something that Mark Twain, the American humorist, once said when he was asked to speak at a conference, and he said, "How much time do you want me to speak? Because if you want me to speak for an hour, I can start right now. If you want me to speak for a few minutes, I need 3 weeks to prepare." So this is somewhere in the middle, and I've prepared somewhat, and we'll touch a few topics. Now, one of the important things for me to tell you is a little bit about my company, because most of my perspective comes from my company. I'm not speaking for an entire industry. I'm not that bold. But some of the things that I talk about, you'll recognize in your own companies. Maybe not the same scale, maybe not the same timing, but they're very similar issues. So NYSE Euronext, most of you know what the NYSE part is. It's that familiar, represented by that familiar icon on Wall Street in New York, with the big pillars and usually the big American flag, or at least a company designation if we're celebrating a company event. But we operate several exchanges in the United States, not only the New York Stock Exchange. We operate several exchanges in Europe. We have partnerships in the rest of the world as well. And if you take our business, you divide it into 3 segments, 2 of which will be very familiar to you, the third not so familiar. The first is the equities trading business. This is the stock in the New York Stock Exchange. Everyone knows about that. We've been doing that as part of the New York Stock Exchange for over 200 years. And if you include our European properties, the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, which is part of our company, which is the oldest in the world, our company is over 400 years old. And as I like to point out, and CIOs, of course, resonate with this, so I've got 400 years of legacy systems that I have to deal with. So sometimes it's quite a headache. So we have the equities business. We have a derivatives business, also global in both continents at the very least, and more to come. But the more interesting part for me, even though these 2 businesses, of course, are a very important part of what we do, is the technology business. We are a seller of technology. Some of the things that we do, many of the things that we do for ourselves so well in terms of complication, complexity, cost, scaling, that we found that our customers wanted the ability to do this as well. So our technology business, which we call NYSE Technologies, is several $100 million in revenue, and we expect it to be $1 billion business within a few years. So it's the big growth aspect of what we do. And as I like to point out to people, in our business, there's nothing, in the equities and derivative side, there's very little you can do to stimulate demand. You can't make people trade any more than they're going to trade. But when you're selling technology, as our colleagues at Dell know, there's a lot of things you can do in creating new products and services to create demand. So it's very exciting from that standpoint, too. Now, to touch on some of the points that I saw in Anissa's presentation earlier, our customers expect a few things of us. And they're a very mild, non-demanding group of people, as you can imagine, people that trade in equities and derivatives. They only ask for 3 things to be 0. They want response time to be 0, they want downtime to be 0, and they want cost to be 0. Other than that, everything is fine. And by the way, they don't want 2 out of 3. They want all 3. So we're very, very much focused on trying to make sure we provide all those things. To give you a quantification kind of picture of what our environment is like. If you look at just the New York Stock Exchange, it's a 6.5-hour trading day. Doesn't trade 24 hours a day, but other exchanges have different hours in our portfolio. It's a 6.5-hour trading day. In that 6.5-hour trading day, on peak days, we do many billions of transactions. Per second at peak, we can do millions of transactions. Each one of those transactions, if we're being competitive, the response time should be about 100 microseconds. And 100 microseconds means you're a customer, you send me a message, an order, something for me to do. I take a look at it, I do something with it. I send you back a message saying I've done something with it. That turnaround time should be about 100 microseconds. And in our data centers, by the way, we built 2 new data centers. One both of them last year, we started them. One outside of London, one inside the United States in New Jersey. Most of the space, it's almost 750,000 square feet if you combine the 2. Most of the space in those 2 data centers are for our customers, not for us. For us to host their technology efforts, for us to provide services for them, which we'll touch on in a moment. And the reason for that is because when you are dealing with microseconds of response time, the distance that you have between my computer and your computer makes a huge difference. In most businesses, people don't know the statistic I'm going to tell you because why would you need to know it? In our business, you can ask any of our experienced people, how long does it take light to travel 1 foot? And the answer is about 1 nanosecond. Now, why would most people care about that? In our industry, a nanosecond here, a nanosecond there, pretty soon you have a microsecond, and you're making a difference. So we care about those things. One other thing I'd like to point out in terms of stats, and this is probably approximate, but it paints a picture. We do, in a 6.5-hour trading day, more transactions than Google does searches in 24 hours, and based on published accounts of their server farm, we do it with 1/10 of 1% the number of servers. We are obsessed about efficiency, not only because of cost, but because when you're talking about making sure that a message gets from point A to point B as quickly as possible, you have to be concerned with every piece of your operation stack. So how did we get into the technology providing business? And specifically, I'm going to tell you that we're a provider of private cloud. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on the panel. But what we found from our customer base, and one of the few positives about the financial crisis of the last few years is that it made a lot of financial services firms. And in our world, we focus specifically on the capital markets segment. We don't focus on all financial services. But it made quite a few firms look at their operations and start to question things they'd never questioned before in the spirit of making things better. And that was an opportunity for us to say, we've done all these great things for ourselves. The idea of a private cloud offering to facilitate the offering of all kinds of services from infrastructure all the way through platform and software as a service seemed like a really good opportunity. And then people might say to me, well, why are you different from any other cloud? And the 3 prime reasons that we're better, there are probably a few more, but the 3 prime reasons are we are very concerned about security. Now, everyone's concerned about security, but we have what I say is the unfortunate membership on one of the top 10 lists. There are a lot of top 10 lists you'd like to be on. This is a top 10 list you don't want to be on. Our physical location in New York and our electronic presence is always in the top 10 based on what we hear from intelligence authorities of places to attack. So we are very much concerned about security. We're very much concerned about reliability. We have trillions of dollars that flow through our systems every day. When you lose something, and if you have hundreds of thousands or millions of transactions a second, if you are down for a few seconds, a lot of money falls on the floor very, very quickly, and a lot of people get upset. So reliability is something that we're probably more concerned about in terms of average. And then the other one is this performance issue. When we're counting microseconds, we want to make sure that we've architected our data centers. We're very much focused on performance. The average business doesn't care about a microsecond here and a microsecond there. We do care about it. Our customers know that we care about it. And our customers know that we understand their application space. Anise made this comment earlier about a bank person doesn't want to hear a healthcare technologist to talk to him about things. He wants somebody who understands his domain. We understand our customers' domains, so we provide those things. So let me touch on another few technology topics that are important to us, and I'm sure they're important to you. Every technology conference that I think you've probably attended in the recent past, including this one, the 3 to 4 technology topics that always have to be mentioned, otherwise people feel they're remiss. One is cloud, clearly. The second one is security. The third one is mobility. Now, we're not a big mobility advocate because mobile applications don't have a huge prominence in our space. Maybe they will in the future, but right now they don't. And the fourth one, which is an up-and-comer, but you hear about all the time too, is big data. Everyone's talking about big data. And what I like to say about some of these concepts, especially cloud computing, and for those of, I think some of you will recognize the comments I'm about to make. The first, who knows what happened in 1964, based on my research? 1964 is a significant year with respect to cloud computing. And the answer is, I won't wait for an answer. One time I asked this question of a crowd, and a guy raised his hand. I know what happened in 1964. What? I was born. I'm sure that was very significant, but not relevant to cloud computing. I also like to point out that the Beatles came to the United States for the first time in 1964. An interesting piece of trivia, but the first, as far as I know, the first commercial cloud company was doing business in 1964, except we didn't call it cloud in the 60s. Not that I was working in the 60s, but you know, from the history books. But rather we called it time sharing. And I know a lot of people will say, oh, that's not the same thing, and some people don't even know what I mean. Sometimes when I say time sharing to people, if they're in their 20s, they say, time sharing? Time sharing, is that when you buy fractional interest in a condominium? Or I don't understand what that has to do with computing, but no. And if you look at the technologies, many of the technologies that underlie cloud computing, virtualization, invented in the 60s. The internet, which is usually a key piece of what we do, invented in the 60s. Unix and C, which underlies much of what we do, invented in the 60s. So it's a 50-year-old concept that's getting a new life here. And one of the most important things about cloud is it makes very pretty PowerPoint presentations. You can have, cloud backgrounds are much prettier than utility backgrounds and grid backgrounds and on-demand computing. Those are too abstract. Clouds everyone likes with clouds. So we'll talk a little bit about more clouds, but we're a user of clouds for our own internal services. We also sell it to our customers, and very good response so far. Security, I already talked about security. See, we're obsessed with it, not only from an external perspective, but also an internal perspective. As many of you know, insider threats to your organizations are as likely to cause a problem as the external threats, although the external threats seem to be the ones that get most of the airtime. And we're not talking about just malware. Malware is, of course, we're all looking out for that, but that's kind of yesterday's news. We're more concerned about, when you advance the malware spectrum, to zero-day threats, where you're not really sure what you're looking at because no one knows what it is. And then I just was talking with a gentleman 2 days ago who was telling me about the industry's concern, as if I didn't know, with advanced persistent threats, where nation states have organized themselves to attack other computer installations, not only to do damage, but to steal their intellectual property to fuel their own companies. This is something, and by the way, that's an external threat. It also could be potentially an insider threat. We need systems and processes and people to watch out for all these things. From a low latency perspective, I talked about how important a microsecond is for us. We're very concerned, we build our architectures understanding operating systems, understanding hardware platforms, networks, the connectivity between all those pieces, the applications, so we can get the maximum performance out of everything we do. Now, many of you might say that in your industries you don't care about a microsecond, but in principle you would care about making things more efficient and lowering your cost. And if I segue into the topic of big data is a relative term. When I started off my career in the computer world, big data might have been a gigabyte. And today we'd laugh at that. We'd say that's an iPod's worth of data, or less than an iPod's worth of data. But when we had a gigabyte worth of data back in the old days, people still didn't know how to analyze it. Now we have terabytes and we have petabytes. Our biggest online database is about 10 petabytes. For some of you that might be large, for some of you that might be small. The question is, how do you deal with it efficiently? How do you take advantage of the value of the information in it? Those are big questions we're all dealing with, but they're not new questions. People have been dealing with them for decades. The scale is different, the cost profile is different, but it's a similar problem even before the term big data was invented. And that's related somewhat to our low latency issue, because from a low latency perspective, we want to make sure that we can move, whether it be transactions or data, from point A to point B, or if you're moving the applications to the data instead of moving the data to the applications. How can you do that quickly and efficiently? That's something that a lot of us would be concerned about, not just those of us in the capital markets industry. So I'll touch on one more topic, though, because this has really been a little bit of a shotgun approach to a couple of things that we're interested in. But one thing that I have to underscore here is we can all talk about all the technologies that fascinate us, all the technologies that are being presented by vendors. But one thing is, how do you make sure that you have a culture in your own companies that is able to recognize these, chase them down, deploy them productively? This is something we're concerned about all the time, and I think many other companies as well. In my CIO title, the I stands for information. Obviously, traditionally it would. But it also stands for innovation. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at my firm as well. We're trying to figure out how do we take a culture that is 200 to 400 years old. Now, those people, most of those people have retired. They were there from the beginning of the firm, but it's 200 to 400 years old. How do we transform that into a Silicon Valley startup kind of mentality, but knowing that it is not 5 or 6 people that do this, it's thousands of people that make this happen. And without that culture, and it's not an easy thing to do, as many of you may know, some of these ideas will take too long to implement, the wrong ideas will be chosen, too many things happen too quickly. It's such a competitive world, even more so than ever. The ability to jump on these things quickly, institute them quickly, make them change quickly, because you can never rest for a second, because most competitive advantages are not sustainable. You have to keep on reinventing them. This is something that underlies all of these technologies. It's something that we're trying very hard in our company to do in terms of changing the current people to think more innovatively and provide the processes to make it easy, and bringing in new people that think differently. That can help refresh and recharge our culture. I've worked in large companies, I've worked in startups, I know the difference, I know the good and bad of both, and I try to bring all that to bear in everything that we're doing at our company. And I know it's, if you've, of course, in the news, it's also a very current topic, innovation, 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 but it means so many different things to different people. It's something that we're very much focused on. So I'm going to pause there, again, with a little bit of a teaser and appetizer on all these topics. I'm going to pause there for a moment, and let me ask you if you have any questions that I could rapidly address, and we'll go from there.
Yes, sir.
Hi. Steve, I have a question for you on your innovation mandate. What is the performance or what is the success criteria for you as far as innovation program is concerned? And just a follow-on question, how do you, what is your reach in terms of the organization, people working in your organization for contributing to your innovation program?
Those are great questions. As we all know, anytime we're trying to see if we're moving the dial on something, we need to have metrics. Anecdotes are great, stories are great, and you can either believe them or not believe them and feel good about them, but you need metrics. And innovation metrics are hard to come by. The best innovation metric is the traditional one. If you say that you have an innovation process and that you have a product that came out of it, and it delivers revenue or cost savings to your bottom line, and you do your typical ROI or whatever calculation you want, that's the best innovation story of all. Those are not as easy to get because sometimes it's hard to tweeze those apart. So we're grading ourselves on those and also on process. So for instance, we train people to the extent that you can train people in innovation. We train people globally, and this is both technology and business because I'm responsible for innovation on the business side too. Globally, how many people have we given innovation religion to and innovation empowerment to get them to ask the right questions, to get them to be a more risky culture? Because we have moved the dial quite a bit on the New York Stock Exchange. When it was a private firm, which was just 5 years ago, very risk-averse culture. And now we've made them a very, not risk-seeking, but much more open to risk. That changes people, and making sure that the management responds to that, celebrating failures, hopefully not too many, but celebrating failures as much as you do successes, so that people understand this is a learning experience. I've seen stories of a few companies, we haven't done this yet, where they award an award to the person who has the most significant failure of the year. Now, hopefully it doesn't cost a lot of money when people do that, but they want to show that the company's rewarding risk-taking, and sometimes you're going to fail. Hopefully you succeed, but sometimes you're going to fail. So we measure how much we've trained people. We also measure how many ideas people submit to us and how far those ideas get in the pipeline from, hey, I've got an idea, which is the beginning, to being more explicit about it, to getting it through a vetting process to see if it's worth pursuing, to actually taking it to execution. We keep score of that too, but the ultimate score is what are you delivering to the bottom line? But we're grading that, but we're also trying to grade the process and see how much better the process can become over time, so that the extent you can make this a machine in your company, which is the ultimate goal, that we feel we're moving in that direction.
Hi, my name is Suri. I got your point about working on microseconds. I read roughly about a year ago, a little more than that, that one of your members had tweaked his IT infrastructure and network mechanism to get to you quicker than the rest of the other members, giving him a milli-microsecond advantage kind of a thing. So how do you deal with stuff like that?
I'm sorry, how do we what?
So how do you deal with...
how do we deal with that?
Yeah, how do you deal with that? Because the point is, how much faster do you get?
It's a very good question. We think about it all the time. The only thing that limits us is the speed of light. This is the thing I explain to my management all the time. I will be as aggressive as I can be and as much of a dreamer as you want me to be. There's only two things I can't seem to change. I can't make more than 24 hours in a day, and I can't alter the speed of, I can't surpass the speed of light. And I'm telling you, about a year ago, my supervisor at the time, when I said that in a room like this, he said to me, my thinking was too constrained. Why do I let the speed of light get in my way? And then we make jokes about the fact of orders that arrive before the person sent them. We call them psychic orders. And there's all kinds of jokes we can make about this. But you can sit down, and as I have and my colleagues in my counterpart companies have, to figure out, given the state of the art in hardware, what's the fastest you can do? And you can come up with, for instance, putting everything on one box, because server-to-server communication is slow, relatively speaking. Doesn't matter what interface you use, whether you use conventional TCP/IP, whether you use InfiniBand, whatever your connection choice, it's slow to pass messages. Then you even can get concerned about the distance on the backplane of a server. But if you were going to go to the limit that hardware allows us, because it's not really software the problem, our software is pretty optimal. You're in the nanosecond, in the hundreds of nanosecond range. And beyond that, we have to wait for the hardware to get more advanced. Maybe optical computing or DNA computing or other kinds of things. But having said that, well, our job as a service provider, especially in a regulated industry, many of you, I think, are in regulated industries. You get an additional constraint when you do that. And a regulated industry is to make sure that our playing field is fair and level for everyone, that no one has an unfair advantage. Now, if you were a smarter algorithm writer, good for you. If you've gone to a technology vendor and you're the first one to get there and they've got a NIC card that is just a little bit faster than the next guy, good for you, install it in your server. We provide the infrastructure and the landscape that you can fill. If you're more clever in how you fill it, that's great. The bad news is that there's very few proprietary things there that no one else can copy. So if you're going to do something today, you may have an advantage for 30, 60, 190 days. Great, you may make a lot of money during those few months. Someone else is going to know what you're doing and implement the same thing, and then you need to raise the stakes again. But we have to make sure that our playing field is level, and we do a very good job of doing that. Beyond that, it's really how smart our customers can be in implementing their particular version of what they do.